Hello, creative Tartanites, and welcome to another episode of Tea with Tania. Today, I am excited to introduce to you a fellow creator, fellow knitter, and new designer, Meridittlemakes. I'm going to keep this introduction short because the chat that we have had was a very long one. I have edited it, but I've kept a lot of it in because there's so much gems of information in there. So I'm hoping that you will also find it interesting, that it will keep your attention. It's the perfect podcast to have on in the background whilst you're crafting, knitting, sewing, whatever takes your fancy, or just simply sit back, relax with a cup of tea or coffee or water, whatever you drink, and enjoy. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Meri. So welcome, Meri. I really appreciate you coming and having a chat with me today. I'm very excited. So welcome to Tea with Tania. I don't have tea today. I just have a simple glass of water, but sometimes that's what's necessary. What have you brought with you today to have a drink of?
I have coffee today in my lovely mug. It's a handmade mug from Etsy, and I can't remember the name now, which is very bad, but I'll just see if I can find it for you later. But I have Cotswold coffee, which was a Christmas gift from my dad, with some oat milk today.
Oh, nice. So it's proper coffee, as they say.
Proper coffee, yeah. It's drip
proper
coffee. Yeah, it's very tasty.
I have to confess, I do like coffee, but unfortunately, I have a bit of issue with my guts, and so I don't tend to drink coffee anymore because of the caffeine. But it does sadden me because I do like coffee. I don't drink tea either anymore, except for herbal teas. So I do sometimes drink that. So obviously, I've invited you along today for a very special reason. And that is because I had the honour to be a test knitter for, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but for your very first pattern that you've designed yourself.
Yeah, it is my first pattern. My husband's just coming in the door, so I'm sorry if you can hear the door going in the back. Yeah, it was my first ever pattern release. I'm really, really proud of it. It's called the Little Wing Socks, and annoyingly I don't have them here, which I was going to show them, but they are currently in the wash because I've been wearing them so much. So I didn't plan that well at all. But you can show yours,
right? Because I have.
Yay!
Although I have to confess, I did decide I wanted to put a little bit of a rib on, just to kind of try and sort of, I like my socks to kind of hug my ankle. But I have to confess, I don't think it's worked out as well as I thought it would in my head. Although it's not too bad. So that was the cuff I kind of ended up putting on it.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So I will put up photographs, probably here in the middle between the two of us, to let people see it properly, because I don't think that this is necessarily all that particularly clear from, oh no, it is coming up, not too badly. There you go. So there's the little wings there.
That's the wing stitch, yeah.
I'll put up a photograph just to let people see what your vision of it looks like, because your original socks are striped, and because of the stripe, it really accentuates the little wings. And I just really thoroughly enjoyed knitting these. It's such a simple but yet effective pattern. They're toe up, and it was the very first time I've ever knitted toe up as well.
How did you find that?
It was actually a lot easier than I had expected. What surprised me was, you obviously, within the pattern, there was the yarn overs, and I've done yarn overs before, and they've not gone so well because there's still been a bit of gaps. But I have to say, I really, really like the way that these particular socks have actually turned out. So there's no holes. As you can see, I still haven't taken the markers and things out, but that's because I haven't done the second sock yet.
Yeah, so you need
I've
it for
got a
your...
little bit of second sock syndrome going on, I think.
Yeah.
Got distracted with other things. So I actually found the toe up really much easier than I had anticipated. Was there a particular reason why you decided to go with toe up rather than cuff down?
So I've, at this point, I've knit a lot of socks. They are the thing I knit the most. And I've mentioned, if you watch my podcast, I've mentioned that I haven't done that many garments yet. I'm trying to kind of branch out more into garment knitting because I have plans. I have plans for garments this year. But I've done a lot of socks, and I learnt cuff down first of all. I think a lot of people do. But then I always got really frustrated with the fact that I couldn't really try them on that easily, cuff down, and I could never gauge how long that I should make the cuff. So I would always make the cuff a little bit shorter because then I knew I'd have enough yarn for the foot, all those kind of things. And then you end up with lots of yarn left over. And at the time, the slightly budget conscious economy brain I had I was getting frustrated with all this kind of wasted yarn. So I was doing a lot of scrappy socks as well because of that, because I had lots of extras. And then I found a toe up tutorial on YouTube and thought, I'll just try this magic cast on thing. I was never bothered by Kitchener stitch. I know a lot of people switch to toe up because they hate Kitchener. I actually I've never been that fussed. I found it really hard to start with. I always messed it up. The first 3 pairs of socks, there's this like horrible wobbly toe at the end because I just could not work out how. But now I find Kitchener really straightforward, and I've kind of got the rhyme, the little saying in my head to go knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. Like I kind of remember it now. So there wasn't so much that. I think it was more an economy thing. I thought I'll try toe up, and I did my first pair of toe up socks and just thought, oh, this is amazing because I can just make the leg as long as I want now. And see how much yarn I've got left. And that was sort of the first thing for me. And then it was really about being able to try them on as I went, because when I was doing different kinds of stitch patterns, especially texture, it can really change the fabric and how much it stretches, and being able to see how it stretches out over your foot and things like that. So yeah, I think it's just a preference thing. But the yarn over toe up, the yarn over increases that I put into the little wing socks, that's quite a new thing for me. And I'm in the next sock pattern that I'm going to be releasing, there'll be a different kind of heel that I've not done so much before as well, because I think once you've learnt the basic construction of a sock, I used to use them especially as a way to learn like at least one new technique. So every time I knit a new pair of socks, I would try and do one thing that I hadn't done before. So it might be toe up, might be a different heel, might be a different cuff, might be ribbing, which I'd not done, or a stitch pattern that I'd not done, because it's such a small amount, but it's got all of the things that you need to make a much bigger garment later. Yeah, which I really like about them. I think it's why I've always got a pair of socks on the go. They're kind of my technique learning stuff. Because as much as I would love to learn a technique on a jumper or a sweater, that's a lot of knitting to learn something. And when you're learning, you make mistakes, and you don't want to make mistakes in a big garment that you've spent a lot of money on as well, and a lot of time. So I tried to learn new things, and the yarn over increases I got from Roxanne Richardson on YouTube. Amazing technique, master knitter. She's incredible, and there are a few people, and I think everyone talks about the same people on YouTube, but there's very pink knits. Roxanne Richardson, Chili Dog is another one, and there are all sorts of people, and Suzanne Bryan is the other one, who I followed for a long time, just on very specific technical questions. And I saw that increase in one of Roxanne's amazing videos, where she's doing like, here are all the kinds of increases you can do, and here's how they affect the fabric. And I was watching that, and I saw the yarn overs and thought, I bet that would work in a toe of a sock. So I tried it, and I just really liked it. I like how easy it is to do, and I also really liked that it doesn't mess with the tension by
Mm.
like a lifted increase because you're taking the strand from the row
Oh,
below.
yeah, of course.
You're always making one kind of tighter stitch because you're stealing some of the tension from the row below. And I've never really liked the way that looks. And then I used to do knit front back, which was my kind of standard my standard increase, but again you're making 2 stitches in one, so again you're sort of messing with your tension. And it's a sock, it's such a tiny thing, but I just really like the way that the yarn overs worked. So yeah, I prefer toe up, but it's mostly a preference thing, I think.
I think for me personally, such an easy, knit to do, but what I did struggle with is when I made a mistake, coming back, like bringing it back down, sort of putting in the I've learned to put in a what was it you called, a lifeline. I learned to put in a lifeline, but I couldn't figure out how to put the lifeline actually in the wings,
in the wing stitches,
to kind of catch them. So what I ended up doing was just putting in the lifeline round the sock but leaving the wing, and then just winging it.
Nice.
just kind of picked them up and then kind of sort of swapped them about until it kind of looked right. It may not be right, but it doesn't show that it's not right. So as far as I'm concerned, it's right. So I've managed to kind of do it. But I would definitely say that, pretty much anybody would be able to, if you can knit and you can purl, then you'll be able to make these socks. And they're just so adorable and cute. And, you can make as you say, you can make the leg any kind of length that you want to. I particularly like ankle socks. So that's why I've done the shorter, but I could even probably do them shorter again, because I quite like, the little trainer socks that you get.
Yeah, like shorty, proper shorty.
Cute as those little trainer socks too.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea. And a few people asked, when we were doing the testing, why I hadn't put yarn quantities in. And it's primarily because, like you say, with socks, you can make them really as long as, once you get past the ankle, you can make them as long as or as short as you want. I mean, if you wanted to make a full set of stockings, you probably could with this stitch. That'd probably look awesome, actually. I wonder if you did like a longer pair and put the little wing at the back of the leg, that would be really cool.
Yes. Oh, yes. And very like the old stockings.
Like stockings. That could be cute.
It would be.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Sometimes you have chats with people and then suddenly this kind of thought pops into your head, because one of the things that you had mentioned was you could do these socks ankle down if you really wanted to, but it would just mean that the wings would be the other way, and I am kind of tempted to actually try that on my next pair, just to see what it would look like.
It looks really lovely. It's just that you get like mountains instead of birds. Mountains instead of valleys, I guess. I'm experimenting with that stitch a lot. I'm a bit obsessed with it at the moment. I found it in, where did I find it? I think designing is one of those strange things that sometimes you just have a vision in your head of, I want to make this, and it just comes to you. Sometimes you find a color or a yarn color that you really like. Sometimes something else entirely inspires you and you go, I want to make something that reflects how I feel about that or what I see or whatever. And then sometimes you find a stitch and go, wow, that stitch is so cool, I need to put that into something. And that's what happened with these. I knew I wanted to release a sock pattern. I very intentionally wanted it to be a pattern that a beginner who had knit one pair of socks could do, but it would be like a challenging knit, that it was challenging but achievable for pretty beginner knitters to do. I am going to attempt to record a video because a few people have asked me about ripping back. I'm going to try and make a mistake and rip back and show how to fix it. That might go horribly wrong, but I am going to try and do it, because I had that as well. The first few times I was playing with it and I was like, oh no, that's wrong, ripping back and going, because it is effectively, it's a cable, it's cable technique is how you do that little wing stitch. So it's the same sort of premise as ripping back cables, which can be tricky because you're swapping the order of stitches around, and then you've got the slip stitches in the middle to contend with as well. So there are a couple of things you have to kind of consider when you rip back. So I might try and make a video for that. But I found the stitch and just was like, wow, this is really cool. And it's short enough that even though it's cabling technique, it doesn't feel too onerous. I think once you've done it a couple of times, it becomes, okay, I think I get this now. And I really enjoyed in the testers group, the people who were like, oh, I've done it with a cable needle, and now I've switched to not doing it with a cable needle because I think it's quicker, and I feel more confident that I can do this now. Yes, that's what I want. Because of course you can do it with a cable needle the whole way through, and that's fine, but it is much faster if you don't need to. And I think there's something strangely empowering about feeling confident to pull your needle out of just a couple of stitches and then put it back in again and know that they're not going to go anywhere. That's quite it's a good confidence builder as a knitter, I think, to know that you can pull your needle out of a few stitches and then the whole thing's not going to suddenly disintegrate on you.
I didn't and I was obviously part of that chat, and I didn't end up trying it, because what I ended up doing was actually I got faster at doing with the cable needle, because I found a way to hold it without the cable needle just slipping right down. I just held it, and half the time I didn't, like, I used to try and put it into the little V part of the cable needle. And I ended up, I didn't put it in there because it was just a pain in the backside. I just a lot of motion, isn't it? I just simply put it on the end of it and kind of held it either to the back or to the front or wherever I was holding it. And that's how I ended up doing it, because I actually found it quicker to do it that way. But that's probably because I'm much used to doing cables. Because I had done a cable jumper for my grandchildren, so that was kind of sort of where I was at. But I can see why it would actually be less of a faff for people to not use the cable needle.
If they're not used to using a cable needle, then I think probably. But if you are and you're really comfortable with it, the only thing that makes the cable needle a bit finicky is quite often the cable needle's a little bit long. So it sort of gets, when you're holding to the back, it can get in the way, because obviously what you're working on has this tiny circumference. But that's really it. And I mean, I did the whole first stock with almost the whole first stock with a cable needle. And then I filmed the tutorial both with and without, and went, oh yeah, actually let's just finish this without and see. I wanted to see if there was any major difference in tension, all those things, and there really isn't. There's no difference at all. So it's just what your preference is. And I know a lot of people who can cable without a cable needle, but they choose to because they actually find it easier and quicker. So that's the beauty of knitting, really. It's like, people who get really
so where can they buy it? If people are into, I mean, obviously,
talking
about a whole load of other things, and I will have gone and edited and put up on the screen. But let's just verbally tell people where can you actually get the pattern for your winged socks?
So the little wing socks are available on Ravelry. They're on my designer page, which is Meridittlemakes. And Meridittlemakes everywhere, same thing in Instagram and Ravelry. But if you don't use Ravelry, and I appreciate that quite a lot of people don't at the moment, you can also buy them through my website, which is meridittlemakes.com. I was watching an interview with one of Andrea Mowry's videos the other day, and they were talking about how they know people who've been like shamed for the way that they knit. And I was like,
really? Oh, wow, that's
such a weird thing, apart from being such a strange thing to shame someone for. I'm like a really firm believer that shame is just not ever productive, like just literally never. But I also think, if you found a way that works for your hands and you like the fabric and the thing that you're creating, then, excuse my French, but who gives a shit? No, I don't understand why it's a thing to be concerned about. But as a designer, that does mean, I say as a designer, I've released one pattern, but when you're
a designer, you have designed.
When you're going through that process, that I'm always quite conscious of that, of like, well, there are lots of people knit in lots of different ways, and you can't cater to absolutely everybody, of course. If somebody wants to knit my pattern cuff down, they can, but they're going to have to interpret it themselves in the opposite direction. Like, I'm not going to write it out in the other way. But where I could, I tried to account for the fact that, you know, some people like having a cable needle and some people don't, and some people have never used one or don't have one, all that kind of stuff, so that there were options. And also, because I'm trying to cater to a slightly more beginner knitter level, I'm conscious that people will probably be at a level where they haven't tried out a lot of these things, so they don't know what they like yet. So they can try both ways and then make a decision, which was quite important as well, to try and
interestingly, I was watching something the other day and they had mentioned that for beginner knitters, in fact, I'll tell you who it was. It was Heather and Hobbs. It was her podcast. And she was mentioning that you're probably better off as a beginner knitter going for independent designers, because they tend to not assume that you know what you're doing. You know, and it isn't just this random one sentence that you're like, what does that mean? I've had a pattern like that where I phoned up my mum and was like, what does that mean? And she's like, I don't know. And she's been knitting for goodness knows how many years, and she's very much a follower of if she's got a pattern, she follows it to the T. She doesn't go off piste at all, ever.
My grandma was like that.
Says she can. I think she could, but I think her confidence is such that she's, you know, obviously believes that she can't, so therefore she can't. She's totally like fascinated by the fact that I haven't been knitting garments for that particularly long, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got this pattern and I'm going to do this with it and I'm going to change that with it, and you know, and do it this way and do it my way. And she's like, oh no, lass, I can't do that. I've got to do the pattern. But yeah, I mean, have you found that actually independent designers are much nicer patterns to actually read, do you think?
Yeah, on the whole, I mean, obviously, I think there's also a school of thought that says, you know, some people don't want that level of explanation. They just want to know what the instructions are, and they have the kind of knowledge and the confidence to just crack on. And some people can find bigger patterns, you know, and when I say bigger, I mean, my sock pattern is, I think, 7 or 8 pages for socks, which is that's a lot. It's a big chunk of writing for a pair of socks. And I know that some more advanced knitters would just skim past all of the spiel and they would just go straight to the instructions. And that's why I tried to keep the actual pattern instructions themselves very straightforward. It's row 1 this, round 1 this is what you do. But at the beginning of each section, so when you've got toe, then foot, then heel, at the beginning of each one, there's quite a big chunk of text and an explanation, and you might want to think about this. And that was me trying to cater to both audiences. If you're a more advanced knitter, you can just skip past that because you know how to do a German short row and you don't need a video tutorial on how it works. But yeah, I think that indie designers are really hyper aware of that in a way that bigger designers sometimes aren't. But also it's really interesting to think, like, what even is an independent designer now? Because there are so few, comparatively speaking. Like when I was growing up and my mum was knitting and my gran was knitting, almost everything they got came from like pattern books or magazines. Like all my mum's patterns, I think, came from magazines. There wasn't really this concept of, I mean, Ravelry obviously when I was very small wasn't a thing. So you found a pattern and then you followed it to the T, but where you got them from would be these kind of bigger organizations and commercial yarn companies and stuff who released, like publishers who released patterns. And so who designed it was almost like an afterthought. Like you didn't know who made the pattern. It was just something that came out from, you know, drops maybe, or whatever the yarn
or whatever the actual wool is, isn't it? A lot of the wool companies used to do it to get you to buy their wool.
Yeah, exactly that. And so my mum's always been a big sewer, and she hasn't knit for years, although hilariously, really sweetly, actually I shouldn't say hilariously, she's getting back into knitting at the moment, and she's trying to teach herself continental. So she came over a few weeks ago and I was like, do you want to learn how to knit continental just for fun and see if you like it? You might not, and that's fine. She's good at throwing. She doesn't need to knit continental, but she wanted to give it a go and she wanted to try my pattern. So she's just finished her first little wing sock and it's very cute. But when I was small, she knit quite a lot, and my dad's mum was the one who taught me to knit. and she's also sewn. And I think she always approached knitting the way that she approached sewing, which was, she would like go to a fabric store and buy those, old school sewing patterns that were in the little envelope with all the bits inside. And that was how she approached knitting patterns as well, is you buy them from like an established person. But what I really like about the indie knitting design community is like the concept of testers, and this idea that we are we're getting the community to help us make it better. And they're all really invested in it, and you're more invested in it, and everyone's just so nice, and they're all just helping lift each other up, which is such an incredible thing. So I think indie designers are really conscious that everyone has to start somewhere, and that it can be like learning a new language, learning how to read knitting patterns. I'm still terrible with charts. Colorwork charts is fine, but any other kind of chart, I'm just like, what does that mean?
I find charts easier for crochet. I do find it, but that's probably because I'm more used to doing the crochet, whereas with knitting charts, I think I'd be a bit like you'd be like, what? What does that
and it's just practice like anything else, I'm sure. But I've always preferred written patterns, apart from for colorwork. I don't know why anyone would ever want a written pattern for colorwork, but for most things I respond really well to written patterns, which is why I will probably keep designing mostly in that way.
First time I ever looked at a color pattern chart, I was like, what? Because I obviously read that direction, as anybody would read that direction. So I wanted to look at the chart in that direction. I actually had to go and find myself a video to find out how to actually interpret, because I wanted to do it from top down, not from the bottom up. And I was
going
like,
literally
once I knew way. I was like, this is a breeze, it's a piece of cake. But at the time I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is not making sense to me.
The first thing I ever tried, I just tried to do a little swatch in colorwork just to see if I could do stranded colorwork. And I remember, stupidly, I was doing it flat, so I had to purl, but it also means you read the chart one way, one row, and then the other way on the next row. And I was just, my brain could not, I was like, what is happening? So then my friend said, just swatch in the round, you'll be fine. And then in the round, it made much more sense. It was like, this way, always this way. Okay, good, we're fine. So it's just practice. And Kat from Heather and Hops, actually, she said to me once, and it's a really interesting thing, when she first started, she did some pretty ambitious things quite early on, but a lot of it was because she wasn't a very experienced knitter, and especially because she hadn't really been kind of in the knitting community really at all at that stage. No one had told her what was hard. So she just saw something and went, cool, I'm going to try that, and then just tried. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because we get things into our heads that like, that's really, like, cables are really hard, or colorwork's really hard. And it's not, it's just a new thing, and you're going to mess it up a lot when you first start, but then you'll learn, and then it won't be hard anymore. And so she tried a lot of really ambitious things that a lot of us would look at and go, whoa, I can't believe you did that as such a beginner knitter. But she worked it out because no one told her it was supposed to be that difficult. So she just kind of cracked on and learned and messed up, and then learned how to fix it as she was going, which I think is obviously hugely commendable. But it says a lot about how people kind of get introduced into knitting, and how we think about like learning new skills. If someone tells you it's going to be really tricky, you got that in your head before you even try. And then it becomes a thing. I can't do that.
Interestingly, I think Ruth loves to knit. Have you seen her podcast? She was talking about she's got I've got the same, I actually bought the same pattern from the Green Bean the Green Bean podcast. She had done like a cardigan, and it's a steeked cardigan. So I've actually bought that pattern with the intention of doing it at some point, because I loved the pattern. And I also love the fact that she done it into a little booklet rather than just, and she's got her artwork on the front. In fact, nice. on the front and the back, because you've got the adult sizes on one side, and then you turn the book round and upside down, and you've got the children's on the other side.
Oh, that's so clever.
Sizes. So it's very size inclusive indeed. And Ruth has done this pattern, and she had watched a video that the designer had done an interview and was talking about it and had said, oh yes, this isn't for the faint-hearted, and that got inside her head, and she started to kind of, you know, get that whole anxiety and you know, thinking, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this, and she struggled a little bit with it until she kind of realized that actually, you know, it's because of her being inside of her own head, and this statement of it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, it's so weird, isn't it? Those things like steeking. The whole knitting community goes, oh my God, steeking, cutting your knitting. Oh no, can't do it. I haven't steeked anything yet, but I'm actually not that afraid of it. And I think it's because I did a cut-in afterthought heel quite early on.
Okay.
Again, because no one had told me that it was weird or difficult. I just went, oh yeah, that makes sense, that you just knit, and then when you work out where you want your heel to be, you just cut. And the concept of cutting your knitting, everyone gets so terrified of that. And I think once you have fully dropped all of your needles accidentally or out of your knitting, and you've had to pick up all your stitches again, you realize how, like, it's not all gonna, like, there's this thing, isn't there, that just the whole thing's just gonna fall apart as soon as you cut anything open. And it's not. Yes, it's loops. Yes, you need to at some point reinforce those loops to make sure they don't go anywhere. But, you know, people knit entire garments with one drop stitch somewhere, and it just sits there and it doesn't unravel the entire thing. And even if it did, it would only unravel one cotton. It's like that we get this thing in our heads that like the whole thing's going to be ruined, and it's not. Suzanne Bryan is incredible for this. Whenever she's doing videos about repair work, she's always talking about, like, put it down flat on the table, just be nice and patient, take your time. If you're getting stressed, walk away from it, come back to it later. It will be fine, but you need to have patience, and you just need to know that it's going to be fine. And if you approach it like that, then it will be. And I love that. I think that's such a good point, because you're never going to get it perfectly right. Like, I actually put it on my Instagram stories yesterday. I'm working on a sweater in a minute. I'll show you. So also, I feel like we should give it a shout out because it's beautiful. This is the first sweater by Hive Knits, Lizzie from Hive Knits. It's amazing. It's so pretty. So it's just stockinette, and then it's got half fisherman's rib.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Sleeves. So squishy. Love it. This is what am I using? Whole Super Soft and dropped mohair. And so it's not as fluffy as it will be, because the Super Soft will fluff up once it's blocked. But I have been working on this for a few days, and you won't be able to tell now because I fixed it, but I got like a few rows before where I am now, and I realized that there was one whole line across that I had done wrong in pattern. I thought, oh, and I kept knitting for a while, doing that classic thing of going, can you tell? Is it that big of a deal? Can I just leave it? And the more I knitted, the more I was like, no, I can't leave it. I need to go and sort it out. I've never done that much in fisherman's rib or half fisherman's rib, so I was a bit like, oh God. And it was like an entire bit, so it was a good like 30 odd stitches. But Lizzie, indie designer, fully accounts for that. She put a link in her pattern saying, here is a link to fixing it. I recommend if you've not done it before, knit a swatch and go and work out how to repair it on the swatch so you feel confident about doing it. And I was just like, see, this is all we need. And then I went and looked at the video and went, I can totally do this. So it took me a little while, because I had to individually drop up one stitch all the way down to there, fix it, go all the way back up, put it back on the needle, and then the next one. So it took me like, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes to fix the row, well, the 30 stitches. But then I had, and it was like, when I noticed it, I thought, oh God, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix that stitch.
See, that's interesting. I never would have thought to do it like one stitch at a time, because I would have probably just ripped it all down and started again.
See, I thought about doing that.
See, I've learned something today.
There you go. Yeah, well, when it's a mistake, and again, this is, I've learned this possibly the hard way. When it's a mistake like that, and it's at this point in a knit, if I was on the body, and it was just miles of stockinette and I'd missed something, I would probably just rip it back, because stockinette's very quick. But I had only just got past the short rows, and I wasn't sure if that mistake was in a short row or not. And I was like, I'm not going all the way back and redoing all this, like, no. But also, because of where it was, I was like, right, I don't know how to repair this. So I'm going to go down and try and repair one. And if I can, and it looks all right, I'll go and do each of them. Yeah. And if not, I'm just going to leave it. Like, that was where I was at. It was like, it's not super noticeable. It might block out, it might not. If I can repair one stitch and I can make it look okay, and it's not perfect, but it's much better. If I can make it look okay for me, I'll go and do all of them. And if not, I'll just leave them, because it represented quite a lot of hours worth of knitting to get there. And I was like, I'm not willing to rip all the way back to this, because it was about 20 or 30 rounds back.
Yeah.
And ripping out mohair it's fine, but it's not the easiest to do because mohair is quite sticky. Right. So if it had been a different kind of fiber, maybe I would have done it. And all these things are just experience, right? Like, if you rip back 100% like superwash merino, then it's really straightforward to do that over and over again, and it's fine. And mohair, you can do it, of course, and it would have been fine, but there are only so many times you can rip out mohair before you start kind of losing some of the mohair that's attached, because it kind of gets stuck on itself. So with a fiber like that, I would always try, same with unspun yarn, it's harder to rip back and you have to be a bit more careful because it's quite fragile once it's not knit up. So again, I would try and rip back an individual column of stitches rather than frogging in a traditional way, just because it would be a little bit less stress on the fiber. Yeah. But yeah, it's all doable. There's just different ways to fix things.
Yeah. I mean, I know I haven't knit for years for the reason that I think I was probably put off, as I was younger, I couldn't knit because I used to, like, my stitches would get too tight and I couldn't get the needles in, and and that kind of put me off for years and years. So I didn't really knit much. And then I kind of learnt crochet. Again, I was actually in my 40s when I learnt crochet. I didn't really learn crochet as a child because, again, I couldn't like work out the whole, like, keeping the tension of the wool and wrapping it around my fingers to kind of, it would just all kept falling off the hook and things. So I was in my 40s when I learned to crochet. But interestingly, when I learned crochet was probably the reason why I ended up being able to learn how to fix my own knitting. And when I learned how to fix my own knitting was when I had much more confidence to do the knitting, because if you know how to fix it, then you're not as afraid to do the thing in the first instance.
Yeah, exactly that. I actually feel like sometimes making a swatch because I definitely didn't swatch at the beginning of my knitting journey. I did not swatch anything because I was like, whoa, prep, who has time for prep? I just want to make the thing. And it bit me in the butt a few times. And I think I still don't really swatch for socks ever, but for garments I definitely do. Yeah. And that's because I want to know what kind of fabric it's going to be. I want to know how it will change when it blocks, because of the fact I work with a lot more less processed fibers now. They change a lot more once they're washed and blocked compared to superwash. So I didn't swatch for anything, but now I've gotten into the habit of, if I know that the pattern has got a particular kind of stitch or color work, for example, I'll make my swatch and I'll intentionally mess up a stitch, drop a stitch or do the wrong color somewhere, knit a few more rows and then see if I can go back and fix it. And that's a really good way of just building up a bit of confidence. I've still not really ventured into lace or brioche, and there are loads of knitting techniques I've never done, but with everything that's new, I try now, and I think it might be Suzanne Bryan who recommended to do this. I try and make mistakes intentionally so that I know how to fix them before I go into the full project. And then, like you say, you don't have that barrier of like, I have to get this right, because if I get it wrong, I'm going to have to rip the whole thing back. And that the only solution is to rip back huge amounts of knitting, which always feels it can feel really satisfying listening to it going round and round off the project can be really lovely, but also your heart's just going why the whole time. It's so heartbreaking. But Lizzie from Hive Knits has said this before as well, because she's been very open about some of the like intense amount of frogging she's had to do on certain projects, and at the time it sucks, but I've never ever once regretted spending the time to go back and fix something, because you're just so much happier with it. And if you're going to put all this time and energy into, and it doesn't matter how fast or slow you knitting a garment or a pair of socks or anything, it's a lot of work. You know, you're making fabric out of a string and 2 sticks effectively. It's a lot. And if you're going to spend all that time making like a really bespoke custom garment in a color that you love, in fiber that you've spent time selecting, you know, spend your money to get this thing, then take the time to make it right. You know, unless you're in a really privileged position of being able to just buy all the yarn all the time, which I don't think any of us are, then it's worth taking that little bit of time to just to undo and be patient and make it something that then you know you're definitely going to wear it and love it.
It's not something that I do, I have to confess to, and I will probably get to the point where I will start swatching and be very similar to you saying, I never used to swatch, but now I do because da 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 da. But I've literally just started, like I only got back into knitting really in October of last year, and my first jumper, I was wearing it earlier on, it just got too warm and I took it off. But my first jumper was this, and it's Drops Wish. And it's absolutely, you know, it's so soft and sweet and lovely, and but you know, it's something that I was knitting for me, and I figured that if it was not going to fit properly, then it, you know, it's fine. It's just it's a jumper, and I'll still probably wear it. I mean, even under the arms, I can see that, you know, where I've picked up the stitches, it's a little bit, you know, bit more holy, but nobody's seeing under the arms, you know?
Yeah, no one's looking under your arms.
And I've probably, I think I found, there's a couple of bits where I've woven it in, and I've not actually cut off the ends. Oh. You know,
on the inside, who cares?
Exactly. So but I think I will probably get to the point, because I mean, again, I have no intention of putting this in the washing machine. It'll be hand washed, and I haven't actually blocked it, so you know, goodness knows what it's going to look like when it's blocked, but I will learn. That will be the lesson that I learn when I block it, when I wash it the first time. And then I'll be like, oh, right, I probably wish I had, you know, swatched it. But it is what it is. And we all are impatient. It's okay to be impatient.
Yeah. When you're talking about sinking, you know, 20 plus hours of time into making something, depending on what it is, then yeah, it's totally fine to be impatient. And we all have been, and we all are. Like, I still am. There are things that I do that I should definitely swatch for more. I didn't learn about washing and blocking swatches until relatively recently, and I'm really lucky. It's never, that hasn't bit me in the butt particularly, but I think it's also because I tend to gravitate towards patterns that are a bit more oversized. So provided that they're not way too small, because I'm making things that have quite a lot of positive ease, I kind of get away with it. And I was wearing my boxy sweater by Hoki Locatelli in my second episode of my podcast, and that's a worsted pattern, and I made it in DK, and it worked out really nicely. And actually, I think I prefer it to what the worsted would have looked like. But the sleeves are on the tight side, and that's because I didn't realize that my gauge, like, I didn't even really know what gauge was at that point. Like, I made it a long time ago. It's made out of quite an investment amount of indie dyed merino, and it's beautiful and it's lovely and soft, but it's a style that I probably wouldn't wear again, because it's very drop shoulder, which is a pain to get underneath coats and stuff. I know a lot of people talk about this, but if you live in the UK, you need layers, and if you want to put a coat over a drop shoulder sweater, it's a pain. And anyway, they look lovely, but they are entirely impractical. So yeah, I mean, I was really lucky, but I didn't swatch for that. I just went straight in and started knitting it. And realized when I went to pick up the arms that I was like, well, I'm only supposed to pick up 40 stitches, but I'm going to need to pick up like 75 if I've got any hope of this fitting over my arms. So, you know, there are things that you learn. It's not the cleanest of pickups, for sure. There are holes under the armpits, all the things. But I'm also mega proud of it because it's a lot of knitting. It's a big, like, oversized box. It's called boxy for a reason. And yeah, I'm still really proud of it. I still wear it. I probably will wear it a bit less once I've made things that I'm a bit more pleased with. But my tulip sweater from Bee Mandarin's Melody Hoffman, I wear that so much. Like, I kind of need to make more garments so that I don't wear it so much, because I'm going to wear it out because I wear it all the time. And I did swatch for it, but I didn't wash or block my swatch for that. And I remember when I was washing and blocking that, being terrified and going, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it was totally fine. It was totally fine. I didn't pin it out because I knew that something strange might happen to it if I did. So I just let it I just laid it out flat on my blocking mats and let it do its thing, blocking mat being yoga mat, and just let it do whatever it wanted to do, and it was totally fine. So I've been lucky in that sense, but I've learned my lesson with a few hats and things that ended up being either like absolutely enormous, or I ended up making a few hats that are just that really annoying in between size where they're not an adult hat and they're not a baby hat, and then you have to find a small person in your life that's like small enough to wear them.
Yeah.
But also small enough that they'll appreciate a knitted hat, because once they're teenagers, no chance. Yeah, so swatching is a thing that I think some people really care about, some people don't, and it's fine. But also fixing mistakes is, everyone has a different tolerance for what looks like a mistake and what doesn't. And again, there's no right answer there. If it looks fine to you and you're like, I'm going to know it's there, that literally no one else is going to notice, so I'm going to leave it, that's fine. Like, who cares? I don't think that
it's
people often talk about
handmade, isn't it? You know, it's the quirkiness of it, and you know, something that I've been kind of sort of my sort of next rabbit hole I'm kind of going down is I've been looking at what they're calling slow stitching, and it's essentially it's collaging with fabric and using stitching that you really, it doesn't matter if it's neat and tidy and you know, all uniform stitches, and I'm like, oh, that's perfect for me, because you know, my hand stitching is not perfect and neat and, you know, always I mean, I can get it reasonable, but I can never get it odd. Have you ever seen there's a channel on YouTube, Dim Life, and oh my goodness, her stitches are like, she hand stitches everything and they are so uniform. I honestly don't know how she does it. I really, and it's a straight line. Her line doesn't go like this. It is actually straight. I
well, like embroidery.
Sorry?
Like embroidery or knitting?
No, she does like top stitching, you know, hand stitching, top stitch.
Yeah.
Straight. I don't know how she does it. I think she's obviously a lot of practice, a lot of hand stitching, and not only is it straight, but her stitches are all uniform.
Yeah, I don't know how anyone has that. But my maternal grandmother, so I'm half Sri Lankan, and my mum's Sri Lankan, and her mum was incredible at embroidery. Needlepoint was really her thing, and mum did it a little bit when she was growing up, not really when I was born, but when she was a kid. And they had these kind of samplers and stuff kicking around, and the things that she used to make were absolutely amazing. And I remember my mum used to do cross stitch where like on a backing fabric where you couldn't see the dots. Like I remember kid cross stitch, you know, those giant like weaved fabric things with holes in and stuff, and they were super fun. But I remember mum working on this massive piece, on a piece of fabric that A, was coloured, blew my mind, and B, you couldn't see the holes in it. And I was like, how do you know where to put your X's though? And I don't know how she did it. She made this beautiful like big rose thing. And I just wouldn't have the patience for it. But again, it's just what you have practice in. You know, I have a lot of friends who do cross stitch, and and embroidery hoops and stuff, and they look so beautiful. And at some point I might try doing one just for funsies, but they look at me knitting and go, oh gosh, no, wouldn't have the patience for that. And also, evenness of stitches is a really interesting point, because I don't know anyone who can knit perfectly even stitches pre-washing and blocking something, because you're not a machine. Like every now and then you're going to have a stitch that's a teeny bit tighter or a teeny bit looser. Almost everybody purls looser than they knit as well. That's a thing, because of the way that we construct our purl stitches. They use like fractionally more yarn than doing knit stitches. So that has an effect. So if you've got a pattern where you're doing some backwards and forwards, so you're doing short rows, for example, the gauge on that part of your sweater is probably going to be slightly different to the rest. All these things. But washing and blocking is one of the things that will really help with that, because the difference between knitting and crochet being that crochet is lots of knots next to each other, and knitting is one loop doing this and then another loop doing this above it, so it's one long strand. So when you're washing and blocking, you have that the yarn has the ability to all kind of sink into place and bloom the way it wants to, but also all of those lines of thread that are going across one whole row will kind of relax and move themselves into place. Any major difference, like if you had one giant stitch, of course that wouldn't work. But for the most part, that was a bit of a game changer for me. I was like, oh, I don't have to knit perfectly, like machine perfectly, because we have this thing, don't we, like, oh, that looks shop bought is like the best compliment you can give someone who's knit something. And as much as I love that, I do feel like that's not really what slow fashion is about. Like when you're making something and taking all this time to make every single stitch in a garment, then being shop bought shouldn't necessarily be the goal. It shouldn't look
sounds like a bit of an insult, really. You know, it looks no, it's not actually, it's handmade.
Yeah, like
it doesn't look like everybody else's, it's unique. It's mine, and I've done it.
It's one of a kind. Not another one exactly like this exists in the world, and there's something so amazing about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, washing and blocking is a thing that can really help with that concern of like, oh, it looks, because there is a line, isn't there? Like, I want this to look beautiful and handmade and well crafted, and you know, the next step down is looking like a Weasley jumper from Harry Potter, which is not where you want to get to either, because you know, you want it to be something desirable and that you want to wear. But yeah, I think it's all about everyone's different preferences and everyone's different tolerances for how handmade something looks. Some people want it to be like super quirky, and some people want it to be quite uniform, and it's fine. It's whatever your preference is.
And I think it's interesting sometimes the wording that people use as well, like, so handmade and you know, homemade.
Yeah.
Could be potentially seen as like homemade is just thrown together, whereas handmade is a little bit more designer.
Yeah, there's a bit more expertise,
but actually they're both the same, really.
Yeah, they are. I think part of it is, you know, getting away from this idea that handmade means bad or homemade means bad. Because I think people forget as well that when you're talking about something you can buy in a store, that was handmade. There was a person involved in making that garment. However much of it was done on a factory machine, there was a person involved in finishing it.
Yeah.
And I think people, because my brother asked me to knit this enormous jumper for him. It's only enormous because he's very tall. He didn't ask me to make something that was like it's a big stockinette raglan jumper. It wasn't a big deal, but it's a lot of knitting because he's big. And when I told him about the different yarns that we could get, he basically said, can you make it? I'll pay for the yarn, because I know that it's an investment of time. And I was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And I told him about all the different fibers and what we could get. And he's quite sensitive skin, so I knew that like the really rustic ones were kind of out anyway. And I told him about superwash and the different things, and he said, you know what, I think I'd probably rather go with acrylic, because I'm going to be really harsh on it. I don't have time to like take care of it and lay it out flat and all this jazz. And I said, that's totally fine. Like, these are the cons, you know, to acrylic. From an environmental standpoint, obviously it's not ideal, but I'll get something that's from, you know, a company that I quite like. So I got some from Woolly Knit, which was really nice. And also I sort of told him about, there's nothing wrong with acrylic, it will be nice and soft, but it will hold odor more. You'll need to wash it more frequently than you would if it was woolly wool, because woolly wool is naturally antibacterial and all those things. And when we finished, I said, okay, I'll go and look at some different yarns and give you the prices. And I gave him the prices for the different types. And obviously acrylic was the cheapest, which he knew it was going to be. But he said, I cannot believe anybody spends that much on just the yarn before they've even made the bloody thing. And I was like, yeah. But also that's because we're so conditioned about how much things should cost. Because the prices that we're used to seeing in high street stores are ridiculous, and for them to be that low, somebody or multiple people along that supply chain are getting screwed over somewhere. I think knitters are really hyper aware of that in a way that a lot of other crafters maybe aren't. I think particularly knitters who start venturing into the world of natural fibers a bit more, they become like really super aware of the cost of fast fashion, like the human cost of fast fashion. And even if you don't mean to, even if you don't go into knitting with that kind of in your mind, you become exposed to it whether you want to or not. So again, for me, that's another pro. It's another great thing to have learnt more about, and to be in a community of people who all care about that kind of stuff as well.
I know for me, I get a little squirmy about using acrylic yarn, but I've got a lot of acrylic yarn that my mum gave to me. So she's had it for she's probably had it for 20 years plus.
Oh yeah, I've got loads.
So it's made, you can't unmake it. So I'll use it. But I've also I've bought acrylic yarn as well, from a kind of like when I was first starting to crochet and things. And again, it was the price point. And so I did tend to buy the cheaper yarn, because I didn't really have the money to. So I try not to make people feel too guilty about using kind of your kind of sort of cheaper price points. And certainly when I was looking at some of the indie dyed wools and things, and I was like, and you get one pair of socks out of that, how much? But I have actually bought said yarn now, and it's actually really nice. And it's nice to support somebody, to help them to pay their bills. So I kind of view it as it's something special, and it takes time to make, and so it's more of the thought and the process rather than the cost necessarily. I don't drink, I don't smoke, so lots of people spend their money on cigarettes and booze, and that's hardly necessarily the best thing in life, is it really? That's a bit of a health hazard.
I really agree. I think so many of us, and I'd be hard pressed to think of anyone who didn't start out buying acrylic yarn, because you don't know what's good and what's not. And also when you're starting something new, it doesn't make sense to invest loads and loads of money into something you don't even know if you're going to like, and don't even know if you're going to pick up in the long term. And also there are certain use cases where it just doesn't make sense to give somebody a beautiful merino garment or a beautiful wool garment. I have a few family members who are very, very sensitive to wool, for example, but also unless the person I was giving it to was a knitter themselves, I don't think I would ever make baby clothes that weren't acrylic, because they're going to be spit up on, they're going to need to be washed constantly, like
in the washing machine, the dryer.
Right? Like, it's just not practical. So I have a fair amount of acrylic also. I had a bit of a buying error and ended up with like twice as much acrylic as I needed for this project. So now I have this big bag of really wild colours that I would never wear myself, and it's like one ball of each as well. So what am I going to do with this? So I'm trying to like self-draft a bit of a mad 80s jumper for a friend of mine who I know will absolutely love it. but again, like there's nothing wrong with doing something that you love at a price point that you can sustain. And I think it can get a bit preachy sometimes in the yarn community, but at the same time, I think everyone is really conscious of that. I think everyone is really conscious that depending on what you make, sometimes acrylic is the best answer, and all of us have some acrylic in our stash for sure, in our yarn catalogues, as I like to say. I really hate the word stash. Yeah, so I don't think there's anything wrong with whatever you want to do. I've still struggled. I mean, I've discovered Mondim now, which I really love, but I haven't had those socks for long enough to know how it's going to wear. And I still mostly use superwash merino nylon, well, BFL nylon if I can find it, but nylon based sock yarns, because I'm really hard on my socks. I wear them all the time. My husband has a fair few pairs now, and he wears through his socks like nobody's business, which is why I'm very excited about. I did a test knit recently for Bethany from Capital K Knitting, and she released a pattern called Tread Heavy Socks, and immediately when I saw it I was like, yeah, I mean, I need to knit this would be perfect for Q, for my husband. And they're really, really great. She's basically adapted the eye of partridge heel flap and gusset, so that you do the eye of partridge all the way around the heel turn as well, and then you add it in at the ball of the foot. And I was like, this is genius. So I'm probably going to start doing that on a bunch of my socks now, because it's just really, really useful. And I don't think I'm going to stop using the nylon sock yarn that I have, for example. I'm going to get through all of that. I'm going to make sure I use it. And while I'm trying to experiment with no nylon socks and natural socks, I still haven't found the one. I haven't found the fibre that I know works, that is at a price point I can sustain for the number of socks that I knit. I luckily I have really tiny feet, so I can get 2 pairs of socks fairly happily out of 100 gram, just about out of 100 grams, maybe a little bit more if I need it. I can do contrast toes and heels and stuff, but I have really small feet. But if I'm knitting a pair of socks for him, then it's a whole 100 grams gone, because he's got giant feet. So those are considerations, and they have to be, because if we want to keep doing this, then it needs to be in a way that we can make it work. And I, much as I love the idea of going and thrifting old sweaters and stuff, there's also a part of me that is like, I love this. I love buying things secondhand. I've always been like a major charity shop buyer, which during the pandemic was really hard. I was like, oh, I miss charity shops.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I didn't need new clothes either, but like, swings and roundabouts, I wasn't leaving my house, so who needs to buy clothes? But at the same time, I want to go and look at charity shops, and I used to love that. It was a really major part of my life. But I also noticed that in the secondhand kind of world, there's this thing where go and find a big oversized guy's sweater, or go idiot with like thrift flips and stuff that's become such a big thing. Go and find like the plus size clothes and then turn them in. You've got loads of fabric to use for something smaller. And I've always been like really uncomfortable with that, because my brain is just constantly going, well, what about all the plus size people who need to shop secondhand as well?
Of course, yeah.
And sustainable options just aren't as accessible for all size points. And I think that's something that quite often gets really overlooked. Like, we talk a lot about being size inclusive in patterns. And people talk about the fact that, they can't find testers for bigger sizes. I mean, luckily with socks, I only make a few sizes, and there aren't that many variations in feet comparatively. But I look at like the really big sizes, and I just think, yeah, I'm not surprised that people can't find testers, because as a test knitter, you have to purchase the yarn and you have to put the time into knitting it. And by definition of having a bigger body size, that's a lot more of investment of yarn and time, because it's just bigger. So, there is a I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot, that if you are someone who really wants to knit in these beautiful yarns, but you need to use like 4 more skeins of it to make a jumper than the smallest sizes, people go, oh yeah, it's a really affordable pattern. I'm like, yeah, it's an affordable pattern for like the extra small and the small and maybe the medium size.
Yeah.
And then it's not affordable anymore for most people. So Yeah, sorry, it was a bit of a soapbox moment, but I think it's important.
No, I think you're quite right, and I guess as well, I haven't kind of sort of mentioned it to you, but I'm actually a mental health nurse. And I kind of sort of, the thought that popped into my head is I wonder how much of an element of shame that there potentially is there, that they're not wanting to come forward to kind of admit that they're that size to do the test knitting as well,
Yeah,
which is a kind of whole different ball game in itself, really, isn't it?
yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, you know, the sizist nature of the knitting community is something that's slowly starting to be addressed. Let's not get into the racist nature also, because that's a whole separate conversation I could talk about for days. But
Yeah.
the sizist stuff is really, really difficult because recently there was who was it? I think it was the Crea Bear podcast, and she made a really beautiful colorwork jumper. And I thought it was really lovely that she talked about it and then said, right off the bat, I'm just going to say, I signed up to do this before I realized that it wasn't size inclusive.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty mad about that. And I'm not going to be
I saw that
purchasing
episode. It was a good episode.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I love watching her. We have very similar aesthetics, which is helpful. Like as far as like jumpers and stuff is very similar, which is handy. But I really liked that she was so open and honest about that, because I think it's not about like cancel culture and like boycotting this designer and blah blah blah. But with bigger designers who have bigger followings, there really isn't any excuse as to why they haven't even gone through the effort of just grading it. Even if they're going to be open and say, look, I haven't had testers do this bigger size, but if you want to do it, please let me know if you have any comments about the pattern, etc. Like that's really fair and really valid, and I get that a lot. There are a lot of people where that's the case, but when you're a big designer that has a big following, I just don't think there's any excuse for not grading it for bigger sizes. Because
although interestingly, there was a comment by somebody, and I would be lying if I told you I remembered what the comment actually said, but she kind of pointed out one of the challenges. It wasn't impossible, but she did point out, or he or she, or they even, in today's culture, that this person had pointed out some of the potential challenges, but what this person then went on to say is, invited people to kind of have that discussion, to kind of get together to see where there's the solution is to these challenges, to be able to because again, as a mental health nurse, I think it's important that we kind of do our best to kind of be confident about ourselves and be have a healthy way of looking about our own bodies. And whilst I'm not here to kind of dictate that, bigger people are unhealthy or not, or anything along those lines. But equally, I think what happens is there's a reason why people kind of overeat for that individual. Does that make sense? People can still eat healthily, but be bigger.
Yeah. There's such a variety of what like where your body wants to sit in terms of weight and size. And I'm not going to get into the extremes, because I think I've had eating troubles in the past. Let's just leave it at that for the discussion point. But the extremes are, of course, there is a certain level past which you cannot possibly be considered healthy.
Yes.
Absolutely. You're putting your own body at risk. You're potentially putting, I don't want to say the word burden, but you're making it so that other people are going to be required in order to facilitate your life. Absolutely. When you get to each end of the scale, for sure. But within that scale, what is socially acceptable is so tight. It's like such a small margin. And actually where society at large's bodies want to sit is so much wider than that. Like there's such a big variety. And I think that it's such a pervasive attitude everywhere that if you are on the bigger side, and when I say that, I'm like, talking about in the UK maybe a size 14 or something, even at that stage, you start getting into all of the difficulties with not getting the right healthcare because people assume that your weight is the thing that's causing the problems and blah, blah, blah. Like there can be so many issues and judgments made before people have had any chance to look at what is your natural genetic makeup, where are you naturally sitting, and it's just really problematic. But then, and also the other side of it is why it matters. Why does it matter to you what somebody else looks like or how they choose to live their life? And that, I think, is a big part, because social media in particular gives us this amazing highlight reel for everybody, but it also leads to this constant comparison, and we're human beings, we're terrible for doing that anyway, and then social media makes it this like extra thing. And comparison is such a dangerous place to be. And even in the knitting community, right, like there's been a lot of discussion recently about these like 2021 roundups of everything I made in 2021, and I find those videos really interesting for the most part. Most of the ones that I've seen, I found them really fascinating, but I have to have a chat with myself before they start, going, do not judge yourself based on the amount of knitting that this person has done, or
yes,
the quality of what they've made or whatever, because in a lot of cases they're getting revenue from their YouTube at this point, or they're getting revenue from patterns that they've made, or part of their income is being a knitter, which is entirely not my life. I have a full-time job. I have a few businesses that I'm responsible for, and yes, I've released a pattern now and I'm starting to delve into that world a bit, but I do not have the flexibility to spend 25 hours a week knitting things. I'd love to, but there's no way. So yeah, I think we give ourselves a lot of negative talk about the fact that we're not living up to whatever standard we're talking about. And my favorite thing to do at the moment is I've been like in therapy for the last year. I'm trying to do a lot of work on rebuilding some of the ways that I look at myself in particular. And one of the things that I saw that I absolutely loved was whenever you catch yourself giving yourself a critique in your head, just stop for a second and go, would I say that to a child? And if you wouldn't, change it. Like if you wouldn't, you're not helping yourself. The other one is like, would you say this to your best friend? Like to the person you love most in the world, would you say this to them? And if you wouldn't, you shouldn't be saying it to yourself. And it's really easy to say that in theory.
But interestingly, we all do it. I think from my perspective as a professional, I get a little bit frustrated with all the kind of sort of the attention on some of the posts on Facebook and various other different social media platforms that are kind of talking about mental health. And now, don't get me wrong, I don't think mental health should be stigmatized, and I think mental health is very normal. But I think what kind of tends to happen with social media is, it's kind of the way it's worded. So like anxiety, for example, is something that everybody experiences. It's part of who we are. And again, like you were saying with the sizes of people, there are extremes.
Yeah.
And we're kind of somewhere in the middle. And we as human beings, we need that anxiety to be able to avoid things that we need to avoid. So if we didn't have anxiety, we'd be more at risk crossing the road, for example, because we wouldn't give us stuff. We would just
there are certain things you're supposed to be afraid of. It's okay.
And so I think, and the other thing is that it's kind of they've kind of labeled anxiety as something is wrong with you, but it's not always something. Again, it's down to that kind of how it's worded, isn't it?
For sure.
If you're the wrong size, there's something wrong with you. If you're thinking the wrong things, there's something wrong with you. And I get so frustrated because we all have mental health, we all have physical health, and we all have to look after both ultimately we have a responsibility to ourselves. And I don't know, I mean, you and I, obviously, we have lots of hobbies, knitting and various other different rabbit holes that we've gone down, and we'll continue to go down, no doubt. And in a sense, that's therapy. But I don't tend to like although I agree that it is therapy and it is therapeutic, and I would kind of sort of advocate that it's therapeutic, I don't tend to like to think of it as therapy necessarily, because it's actually what we should be doing in our lives anyway. Because
it's also, there's no professional involved. There's no professional qualified individual involved in that. You know, like I personally find knitting to be effectively my form of meditation. I can't meditate. I've really tried. I've given it a good go for a few years, and I just can't. Unfortunately, my brain, whatever the way that I have pretty severe anxiety, and when I tried to meditate, it's like my brain goes, okay, now I'm going to serve up every negative thought that you've ever had floating around in your brain. You're going to have them all right now. And I just can't clear my mind. I can't. But what I discovered with knitting was it's enough of a repetitive action, which I think is also why I'm predominantly a process knitter. I give away an awful lot of what I make. Until recently, I haven't kind of gone, oh, I really want that garment for myself. I've just been, oh, I feel like making a pair of socks. Who can I think of who wants a pair? Like, you know, I've given an awful lot of things I make away for that reason. But it's analog, i.e. no screens, unless I want to be watching something at the same time. But an awful lot of the time I'm listening to music, or it's my time away from screens because my work is in front of a screen the whole time. And it's just enough repetitive motion for me where I have to concentrate, but not so much that it's stressful. And then there's enough practicality there that my brain is going, you'll get something at the end of this, so it's worthwhile. So yeah, I think everyone has their own coping mechanisms. Knitting has been hugely important for me from an anxiety standpoint over the last few years. I didn't really get into it until the pandemic was properly a thing. I was sort of playing around with it, and then when we went into lockdown, I was so thankful that I had just found it, kind of come back to it before then.
I think it's been something that a lot of people have started during the pandemic, isn't it? They've
gone,
oh, I've got all this time, what do I do? And so they've started learning to knit and to sew and you know, painting and all the other kind of creative things.
And I think that's amazing. I think it's really lovely that people have found an outlet, and a lot of people haven't gone, I mean, well, let's not talk about the pandemic too much, but obviously technically you could just go back to your life exactly how it was before at the moment, with all the way that the restrictions don't exist in the UK and stuff.
Well, they do in Scotland still, but that's besides the point.
We're getting here, not so much.
We are coming to the end by the sounds of it.
But that's I think the nice thing is an awful lot of people who've picked up these skills haven't immediately dropped them now that the world is opening back up again, and they've seen the benefits of moving that little bit slower and taking that time to be a little bit more intentional. So you'll see a hashtag kicking around on my Instagram a lot, which is move slow and make things. And I actually created that for my calligraphy business, which was a direct response to Facebook's old internal mantra, which was move fast and break things, that used to be like plastered all over their offices and stuff. And it was a really big part of what they did in the world of tech. It was move fast and break, like disrupt, constantly disrupt. So in my day job, I do a lot of work in like kind of adjacently to tech companies and digital spaces. And I think that's why I fell in love with calligraphy so much, why I fell in love with knitting so much, because they are like pure analog. And calligraphy also, you have to concentrate. Like calligraphy is not a thing you can do sitting and watching the TV, because you'll write the wrong word. It's happened to me before. You can't have something in front of your face while you're doing a big calligraphy piece for somebody. And so you have to just sit and concentrate on it, which I really loved about it. It forces you to be totally analog, and to disconnect from the digital. So move slow and make things became a really big part of how I approach kind of all of my making now. And while I am a relatively quick knitter, I don't make things with the intention of I have to get this finished by X. I have to get this finished by. Like, it's when I have the time to sit and knit for a whole day, I 100% am going to. But if I don't, that's fine. And just doing a couple of rows on something is fine. And I can take whatever time I have, and there isn't a right or a wrong speed to be going, etc. I kind of just go, what does my body naturally want to do right now? And I think a lot of people have discovered that, and discovered how impactful that kind of intention can be on your life, having probably never experienced it before. So I think it's amazing that so many people are knitting. And obviously you've got people like Tom Daly, who's now released his own knitting line and stuff now, and is getting all of these people in. And like when We Are Knitters and Wool and the Gang came out and made it like cool to knit, and all of us who'd been quietly making fiber arts things in the background for a long time were like, oh cool. I'm cool now.
No, I know, and I mean it's interesting because, again, you know, as you can probably tell with the grey hair, you know, I'm not young anymore. I'm younger than some people because there are obviously always going to be somebody older than me, but you know, I kind of feel a little jealous of, like, you know, the younger generation now, because it is actually cool to do these things. And I think it's probably one regrets in my life is that I did kind of sort of go away from creativity until I was a lot older. I mean, even as an artist, I wanted to go to art school, and you know, when I was of that age, it was, oh no, you couldn't possibly go to art school. You know, it's you know, you'll end up being a poor artist, you know, you've got to be the best of the best to get in and all that kind of sort of stuff. And as a teenager, didn't have an awful lot of confidence in myself, and so I kind of, what I heard was, well, if they're telling me this, you've got to be the best of the best, then I clearly aren't the best. They don't think I'm the best of the best, so therefore I'm obviously no good. And so, you know, all these kind of sort of thoughts came in, and so I stopped doing it. And I stopped believing in myself for a long time. And I didn't start believing in myself again until I was an adult. And even then, it was
because there comes a point where you just go, don't care anymore. The older you get, the less craps you give about what other people think of you. Right?
Exactly. And so, you know, I'm now, although I say I'm a little bit jealous, I'm not like, it's not like complete regret, and like, you know, I'm not overwhelmed by it or anything, but there is just that little kind of, I wish things had been different when I was growing up. And, you know, if I could you imagine where I would be now if I had kept going? But then I'm like, oh, do you know what? It doesn't matter, because I can't go back. I've got to just start from here, and I'm just going to keep going. And you know, I've literally just started learning how to spin my own wool. I bought the my spinning wheel in December for my Christmas. So
your first skein looks amazing though.
It
does. It's amazing. My first one was lumpy, all over the place, like, because that's just what it is when you first start, and it takes a while to. I think Andrea Mowry's got some amazing content at the moment about spinning, because she still calls herself a novice spinner, and I'm like, can you not? Because the rest of us are like so many miles behind you. Like, I think it's amazing that she's not, because she teaches knitting, of course, and stuff, but she's not going, I can teach you how to spin, but she keeps calling herself a novice knitter, and I'm like, a novice spinner? You're not a novice spinner, you're a very, very good spinner. But yeah, I mean, I only started a little while ago, and I don't get it out as much as I should, because I kind of go in fits and spurts about knitting, and I think also because it's not as portable, and I can't take it around the house with me and stuff like I can with my knitting. But I love it, and Kat from Heather and Hops gifted me some beautiful John Arbon fibre for our wedding present, and it's amazing, and I'm very excited about it. But I've finally got enough confidence to start spinning it, but I'm so scared. So scared I'm going to ruin it. But Andrea was talking to, I can't remember the name of the woman she had on. She's amazing. She's like this complete master of all things spinning. She knows everything. she was talking about the fact that like you've never wasted yarn. Nothing is wasted when you've made fiber, when you've spun things, when you've learned. None of it is wasted, because even if it didn't turn out the way that you wanted, you will have learned so much during that first process. And when you're practicing, like, you need to give yourself permission to make mistakes, and also then find out what you can still do with that fiber, even if it didn't turn out the way that you wanted.
I think one of the most important pieces of information that I ever got from somebody was that you actually don't learn unless you have made mistakes. Because if you do something right the first time round, you haven't learned anything.
Yeah,
you have to have made the mistakes to learn. So without the mistakes, there is no learning. Which that's just that. I think to a lot of people that would just be like, you know.
I mean, I come from a South Asian family, and the concept of failure is like, it's not a thing. You don't fail. Failing is not an option. So it took me such a long time to to like deal with the fact that when you make mistakes, you learn, and making mistakes, and even publicly making mistakes, isn't a big deal. And it doesn't make you a failure of a human being, and all of these things that, you know, these like ridiculous thoughts that start going through your brain. Well, I can't do it. I'm never going to amount to anything, or like all of this negative self-talk. And what I find really interesting about it is that once you let go of that fear, it's like there's nothing you can't do. Like once you just realize it's cool, I'm going to mess up, and that's part of it, then nothing feels like it's too big or too difficult or too, like, nothing feels insurmountable. There's an amazing she's kind of like a huge deal now, but Simone Yetch, who runs a YouTube show and her own business at this point, she decided she was going to teach herself to be an engineer effectively. Like, she was like, I'm going to build things, I'm going to do hardware. Like, hardware is like, I mean, super hard to get into, because there's knitting and like dropping a stitch, and then there's, I'm going to learn how to weld stuff. And then, like when you mess that up, the two things just are not stuck together. Like, that's just how that works. And so she did a TED talk about it a few years ago, and she said, I just decided really quickly that I would build things to fail. Like, I would build things intentionally that were ridiculous and that were supposed to fail. Because then it took all the pressure off. And so now she has this incredible arsenal of things that she can do, and she has her own workshop and all this stuff. But because she very quickly realized that unless she lowered the bar for herself, she would never be able to start. She read out this email in the TED talk. She reads out this email that she had sent to her brother, and it was talking about, like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was talking about how, like, she's really sorry for being such a failure, and how she's terrible. And at the end of it, she goes, I was talking about like getting like a B in a math class in that email. And we're all laughing, but we've all done it. We've all been there and like got a bad grade, or not done as well as we thought we had in something, or made a mistake, and our whole brain has just gone, you are not you're not a worthwhile person. You have no value. Why are you doing this?
I mean, isn't that fascinating? That it's interesting that it does, like, you know, you could have all the compliments in the world, but it's the one insult that you remember.
And that's because our brains are supposed to do that. Like, there's a reason why we remember negative comments more than positive comments, and it's a survival thing. You remember the bad stuff. Like, this is like your comment about anxiety is not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing. When I first had a conversation about my anxiety with a professional, it's the best thing that anyone's ever told me, because I was like, something's wrong with me, I'm this awful person, I'm so oversensitive and over emotional and blah blah blah, and I can't deal with anything, and like, it's all lies, of course. But the best way that it was ever put to me was, it's like your brain is a car alarm. Everyone's got a car alarm, they're really important. Yours is just a little bit more sensitive to what's happening outside the car. So whereas there might be some leaves blowing down the street and all the other cars are fine, your alarm might go off. But your alarm will definitely go off if something bad is actually happening, which is great, because we know that works. But in my head, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense now. because it's the same fundamental principle of you walked down some steps in your friend's back garden and you fell one day, and then every time you go down those steps, your brain just goes, oh, be careful. That's it. Just oh, be careful. And you will always just kind of watch your step on those stairs from that. That's a good thing. It's a useful thing that our brain does. But in today's society where everything is so overstimulating all the time, some of us, that just goes to another level and our brain kicks into you're about to die when you're not, and everything's actually okay. So it's why if you ever see anyone having a panic attack, the worst possible thing to tell them is to calm down, because they logically know that they should, but their brain is sending so much adrenaline through their body going, you're about to die, that you kind of have this horrible, like, I can't calm down, I have to wait until the adrenaline stops, and I have no control over that. And that was so helpful to me to understand that it's a natural thing, it's a natural process, but there is a chemical reaction in your brain, and once it starts, you actually just have to let it run its course, and it will stop. And know what things might set it off, and those kind of things are all really helpful. But there's nothing wrong with, and the way that anyone is neurologically made up is not wrong. It's just a case of understanding it so that then you can build the right coping mechanisms around it. And it's the same for everything. There's nothing wrong with the way that our bodies are made up. There's nothing wrong with the way that we choose to have hobbies or not, or interact with people, all these things. Fundamentally, it comes down to just, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, don't be a dick. It's a very straightforward mantra, but actually that is the base principle. If everyone could just have that tiny ounce more compassion of trying to understand where the other person's coming from. And I think knitters are actually mostly really great at that, and I think it's part of the reason why so many of us have found
because we're all so chilled and just
but a lot of us do have anxiety. That's a lot of us do. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. This is going to be the longest interview in the world, by the way. I'm just realizing we've been talking for so long. But I really love finding crossovers, like fun crossovers between two different hobbies. So when I was younger, I discovered, so my dad is an incredible musician, amazingly good. I'm all right. My whole family is sort of musical in some shape or another. And I did a lot of music up until I was sort of early 20s. And then I kind of gave it up for a while. And he's incredibly good, but he's also got this like super mathematical, scientific, logical mind. And the two things in theory don't go together. If you think about like playing jazz and like improvising with a band, it doesn't feel like that goes with this analytical, mathematical mind. But actually, I discovered that they're like, just from kind of hanging out with my dad and seeing the sort of people he would play music with, there are so many of them. They're all in IT. All of them are in IT in some shape or form. And I think it is because that there's like a part of your brain that is shared between those two things. Like, to be an incredibly accomplished musician, because music is fundamentally sound waves, and there is a science and a maths behind, intervals and chords and chord progression and all of these. All of these. There's actually quite a lot of science and maths, and even if they don't think of it that way, their brain is automatically kind of geared to think about things in a logical way. So if you ever see a really, really talented jazz musician, they're probably classically trained or have some level of classical understanding of like, these are what chords and scales and stuff are, so that they can improvise effectively over whatever else is happening. And I was just fascinated by this. I was like, well, how come all of your, like, you're all totally different people, but you're all in IT and musicians, all of you. This is very strange. And then I discovered many years later, knitting and D&D. So many of us play Dungeons and Dragons, or if we don't play, are like really, really interested in it and watch it and like love the idea of Dungeons and Dragons and or role-playing games in general. And I was really astounded. I was like, wow, there is a huge community of crafters who also play D&D. Huge. It's so interesting to me.
That is interesting, actually, because I didn't realize there was so many people that were into D&D that were crafters and things. I mean, I've got a few obviously crafting friends and things across the world, and I know that a couple of them are actually they do like role playing stuff. It's not D&D, but it's the online one, World of Warcraft? You know, so and I have played D&D in the past. I haven't played it for years, but I have played it in the past. But I do really enjoy like sci-fi and you know, fantasy novels and sort of, you know, Lord of the Rings and all that kind of sort of stuff, and that kind of that's a kind of genre of film. So yeah, I wonder where the connection is in that then. Is it perhaps down to the imagination part then? Do you think it's the imagination is the connection?
I think maybe it's that idea of you know, like in the world of sewing, and I guess a little bit in knitting as well, there's that whole like hobbitcore genre of like people who like to dress like their characters out of Lord of the Rings but made modern. And I think part of it comes down to like a what's the word? Yeah, maybe it's imagination, like that ability to go to have an idea and to have some idea of how it might look at the end. Like to see a knitting pattern, even if you're not self-drafting, but if you see a pattern and go, oh, I wonder if I made that in this color, that would be really cool. You know, like if you just scroll through Ravelry and see all the different interpretations of, and I have to say, like, only a few people have knitted my socks, but it is the coolest thing in the world, having this like blueprint that I made that I gave to other people, and then everyone has interpreted it so differently in terms of color, and even like, you know, the length of the sock and stuff. And I think that's so cool that everyone's got to express themselves through it while also following the parameters of somebody else's design. It's like, it's the coolest thing. And I think maybe that is kind of the connection, because within the world, whether it's D&D or another, you know, tabletop role-playing game or an online role-playing game, there's that level of you exist within these parameters, but then it's up to you. Then you do kind of whatever you want. And in D&D world, it's you decide what you want to do, roll a dice and see how successfully you manage to do that thing.
Although interestingly, I've noticed in some of the conversations I've had with other knitters, there's an element of math, and I'm not very good at maths. My son is. My son, he's currently at uni doing mathematical physics, so he's mathematical, but I'm so not. I still occasionally count with my fingers. I'm not mathematically minded at all, but I am very creatively minded. I'm very visual. So even as a nurse, when I was a student nurse, and then when I was teaching students as well, as I do in my role as nurse, like how to calculate and draw up medications and things for injections. And there is a formula that gets used for that. However, I never ever used the formula because my brain didn't really gel with the formula, but I still got it right. But I did it more visually. So I would have the actual syringe in front of me, and I would be visually seeing the different notches and divide it. Although there was an element of arithmetic because I was obviously dividing it into the notches, but I was visually dividing it into notches. And I did it and I got on so much better. And then I never got it wrong doing it that way. And I showed that method to another student who was really struggling with the formula part of it. And they suddenly was like, wow, I can actually do this.
Yeah.
Because clearly their brain was not quite wired to recognize the formula per se, but was able to do the maths more visually.
Yeah, I love that. So I think that's what's so beautiful about learning, is that there is no right way to learn something. If you get, and even getting to the answer, right? There are certain things like medication, and there are certain things where, you know, you have to get the right answer, you have to find the way to get to the right answer, and there is only one. But there are a lot of other things where your interpretation can be whatever you want it to be. And within a certain, like, you know, there are so many, we talk a lot about amending patterns and making adjustments to patterns, and we talk about how that's one of the best things about being a knitter after a certain point, is having the confidence to go, that's a really beautiful pattern, but I think I would prefer it to have a longer neck, or a shorter sleeve, or a bigger bell sleeve, etc., and having the confidence to make that slight change that means, you know, you're going to love it more, or it's going to fit the person that you're making it for better, etc., etc. Like, I think I talked about this briefly on my Instagram. This is the ginormous sweater that I made for my brother. Look at it. It's so big. It's ridiculous. But he's like 6'1", I'm 5'2". So just to be clear, he is a good foot taller than me. But I knitted the whole thing for him, and it actually knit up really quickly. Being acrylic, it helps. And it looked really great. But he is a very tall, quite slim chap, and I made the sleeves extra long because I know he has this habit of, he pulls his sleeves up over his hands and kind of holds them here when he's thinking. So I knew he was going to do that. So I was like, well, I'll make the sleeves extra long so that he doesn't like yank on them the whole time and wear out the cuffs, which is what he usually does. And then he tried it on, and he was really cute, actually. He was like, I cannot believe that you've made this. What in the hell? Like, what? How did you do this? He was like completely astounded that I'd made a jumper out of some string and some sticks. But I looked at it on him, and I was like, it's just a few inches too short in the body, and like 2, maybe 3 inches too wide. And while he probably would have still worn it because he's very knitworthy and he really appreciated the effort, I was like, you're not going to wear it that much though. And they live in this amazing four-story townhouse, and it's cold, like single glazed windows, lots of wood floors everywhere, it's cold. So the other thing was, I was very conscious that like he's going to get a draft you know, around the bottom of the sweater because it's not really hugging him properly. So I could have just ripped back the ribbing and done a few more inches on it and left it at that. But I didn't, because I knew that it would still be too wide at the bottom. So I ripped it almost all the way back up to the armpits, and then added, I think, 4 or 5 more sets of waist decreases just to do a little bit more waist shaping to like cinch it in at the bottom. And now I think it's going to be perfect. He gave me a jumper to like measure it against as well. So I think it's going to be perfect now. But those kind of adjustments, I think that's the best thing about being a knitter. It's the same reason why making your own clothes is so amazing, because you get to adjust things and make them perfect for you. And I think also that is, like, for me, that's the best thing about not buying into fast fashion and this whole standardization of bodies thing, which doesn't exist. Like, there is no standard body. And a lot of people, you know, for example, if you're a smaller frame but have bigger boobs, you're always going to struggle. Or if, you know, if my dad is very tall and very slim, and so is my brother, and for a long time they really struggled to find clothes until, you know, skinny fit became a thing in the last few years. My dad has always really struggled. He's always had to have things tailored and taken in, because to get long enough in the leg for a pair of trousers, he'd have to get, you know, all that stuff. And I think that's kind of the amazing thing about having this little piece of knowledge that means you can adjust things and you understand the construction of garments really quickly. Like, I think going from knitting to sewing and the other way around, once you've done a few garments, it's great because you understand how things are constructed and how to make a 2D thing, a piece of fabric, whether you're knitting it or sewing it, into a 3D thing that fits a body. And it's such a cool skill. It's such a cool skill to have.
It's interesting, because I was going to ask you, as a designer, how do you feel about somebody you know, knitting your garment but doing their own thing, and because then it's no longer your sock, essentially.
I love it.
But it sounds like it's actually part of the excitement of why you are a designer, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think so. And I can't speak for other designers, but I'm certainly someone who amends patterns to make sure that there's something I'm going to love. And I would much rather that somebody, I mean, sock patterns aren't especially expensive, and comparatively speaking, they don't take the same amount of effort at all as a full-on garment, I'm sure. And I am prepping myself for my first proper garment design, which will not be for a little while. But I think, you know that, like, even if you don't want people to, you know that going into it, that's what people are going to do. But for me, I think that's amazing. Like, I think it's such an incredible thing for someone to buy a pattern that I've made and go, this is awesome, I love that stitch pattern, but I'm going to knit it cuff down because I'm not, either because I don't like toe up, or I'm not confident with toe up, or whatever, or oh, this looks awesome, but I'm going to make it scrappy. Like, we had someone in our tester group who did a pair of scrappy socks, and they look so good. They look so good.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about it as well for me is seeing people's interpretations that I could never have even dreamed of. Like, I could never have come up with that as a potential, like, color combination or whatever. And I think that's what makes it amazing, is that you see these people who've gone, oh, I wonder if what it'd be like this. And then they do it, and you would never have thought to put those things together, but then you see it and go, wow, that's amazing. It looks so different. And seeing how different a pattern can look in different color, even just different colors, is something that I find really I find that so fascinating. I do that a lot when I find a pattern that I like on Ravelry. I know not everyone can use Ravelry, and it is the least user-friendly thing possibly on the planet, but you know, I know a lot of people who go on Ravelry and they'll find a pattern they like, and the first thing they'll do is go and look at all the other projects of other people who've made them and be like, wow, look at all these different colors. You know, if you see a pattern you love, sometimes you see it in the original colors, and that's what draws you to it, for sure. But I think for a lot of people, they see it, and once you've been knitting for any amount of time, you automatically know you're going to make it in different colors. So you can start, again, it's that imagination thing, isn't it, of like, you can start picturing what you would do with it.
Although interestingly, I, even though I've got a great imagination, I kind of sometimes struggle to bring it to the forefront. So, like, you know, I have these kind of, I've never designed a knitting pattern, and I'm not even sure that I could. I mean, I probably could, like, in terms of, like, I have the skills to, but I'm not sure that I necessarily would be able to get the ideas forward, because even though I might have ideas, even with my portrait painting, when I paint what I see. Do you know what I mean? It looks like the person, and there's very little kind of, you know, changing it up, so to speak. And so, I think, although having said that, I have designed my own fabric patterns, repeat patterns. That's what my age. Repeat patterns. I have designed my own repeat patterns, so I've been able to do that. But I've been wanting to make another repeat pattern, and I don't know if it's because I've been thinking about it too much, but the ideas are not coming to me at the moment. I'm just totally stuck with it. And I see people and I think, how did you come up with that idea? How did you design that? You know, and there's so many patterns that are available, you know. How can you come up with a pattern that, you know, is unique to you? And you know, all these kinds of things go through my brain, even though I kind of know the answers to how they do it. But I guess I'm back to a little bit jealous of people who are able to do that, you know, put their own kind of spin on things.
It's funny, isn't it? I think, so this was something I really wrestled with for a while, was when I had made the first version of the little wing socks, and I was talking to one of my friends and I said, I don't think it's original enough. Like, it's a stitch that I found. It's a toe that I'm sure other people have done before. I've not seen it, but I'm sure that it exists somewhere before. It's a German short row heel, which there are millions of videos to do for free. Why would you need to buy a pattern? And a picot edge cuff that, again, it's not an original. It's just I've put them together in a specific kind of way. But the thing with knitting in particular, and actually anything, is that's always going to be true. like you've taken lots of individual elements that you found from other places that are probably not entirely individual. And, you know, if I'd found a stitch pattern that another designer had made and I wanted to use it, then I would never put it in a paid for pattern, of course. But if it's like a traditional, which a lot of texture stitches like the Little Wing Stitch are, just sitting in a stitch dictionary somewhere, then it's not about, none of those individual things are what make the pattern my pattern. It's the fact that I've put them together in that particular way, and also how I've written the pattern. Because like you said, there are so many different ways to explain things, and different people respond to different things better or worse. So, you know, with the example of learning your formula for nursing, there is the same kind of concept in knitting where you might see the same thing being explained a number of different ways, and you respond to it better in one pattern or in a video or whatever. So I think that you can get into you can tie yourself into a knot with this, I must be original, I must be unique, it has to be mine, I have to have a style. When you're first starting out, I don't think anyone has a style. Like you're building it, but I don't think anyone has a big enough body of work to have a style in any kind of creative endeavor. I think this is true, whether you're a musician or a songwriter or an artist. I'm a very literal artist. I paint and draw mostly people, and up until very recently I didn't consider myself to have a style because I draw quite realistically and have done for a long time. But I think you can't see your own style because it's just yours. It's just the way that you do things. And even if you think, well, it's just realistic drawing, I'm just drawing what I see, somebody else could draw that same thing and say the same thing and it will look totally different. Because actually nothing is, you know, even if you're engaging in hyper-realism art, it's still got some stylistic content that is yours. And that goes all the way across to people who are like full on abstract. I would never be able to be an abstract artist. I'm way too literal. But the concept of originality is such a funny one, and we give ourselves so much self-talk about, I have to be original. This has to be original enough that people are going to pay money for this thing that I've made. But what they're paying money for is also the fact that, you know, I've gone through the time and effort to make the pattern. I've gone through the time and effort to knit it myself a few times and get it test knitted. And all these incredible people have helped me to make sure that it's as clear as it can possibly be. Because like you say, not everyone, like I'm sure somebody in the world could have come up with that pattern and just knit it on a whim. But not everybody can. And some people need those instructions, and some people need that inspiration to jump off of and then start doing their own thing with it. So I am actually going to be releasing another pattern with the same stitch soon. I'll give you a little sneak preview.
Oh, exclusive.
This is on 4 needles at the moment because I tried it on the other day. You're going to come off there? Yeah. So this is using the same stitch pattern as the Little Wing Socks, but I'm calling it the Flock for obvious reasons.
That makes sense.
So yeah, same exact concept, but it's single color. Again, if people want to do it in more colors, they can. And the wings will just jump up into the next stripe like they do on the Little Wing Socks. It's also done in Mondim again because I cannot get enough of this yarn. And there's going to be a new kind of heel that I've not really done too much before. I've done it a couple of times now, but this sample will have that new kind of heel to me. And then it will have a different cuff and leg as well, so it won't be the same pattern all the way up like the Little Wing Socks is. But the point of it is not to I'm kind of trying to exhaust the stitch a little bit and see what I can do with it and see how different it looks, because it looks very different like that than when it's got this like chain kind of going up the middle. But also the intention is to give a bunch of variety so that people can start experimenting with it themselves. The idea being that, you know, if you've bought one or seen a few of my patterns, once you've learned how to do the Little Wing Stitch, you could totally go and do that yourself, and some people will be able to do it without ever buying one of my patterns, and that's fine. What I'm not hoping to become a millionaire with my patterns at all. The idea is just to put enough out into the world to inspire people to try something. And if they do choose to buy it, then what they're paying for is the time and effort and energy that's gone in for me to write it up and to make it into the best set of instructions that I can make it. So yeah, I think if you want to have a go at something, coming up with a design is not a one moment process ever. Like even for socks, I think I ripped the little wings out, oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 times before. I mean, this pair I ripped out probably more than that, because I was trying to work out the spacing. When it was the single set up the middle, it's a bit quicker, but yeah. Initially I did a fish lips kiss heel, and then I was like, no, because that's a paid for pattern, and I don't want to make people have to buy another pattern in order to knit these just using that one. So I put the German short row in. Initially I also had a ribbed cuff, which does look really nice, but I wanted to make it a bit different, and I was going through a bit of an obsession with that picot cuff, because I like shorter socks, so they don't need to hug. Like when they're really long, you need that cuff so they don't flop, because otherwise they kind of sag under their own weight. But when you've got a really nice short sock, you don't really need the ribbing to be super cinched in. So I found this picot and I was like, that's so adorable. So I wanted to put it on everything for a bit. So yeah, it's not a one-time process. And I mean, designing those socks has been in the pipeline for a long time. And I've got probably 3 more sock patterns that are hopefully going to come out for testing in the next few months. Because last year I was going through this thing of going, maybe I could do it, I don't know, maybe I could do it, not sure. So I started writing things up and making stuff and talked myself out of it for a really long time. And then one of my friends was like, just do it. Like, what is the worst that can happen? Honestly, no one buys it, but it'll still exist, it'll still be out there, you still did it. Same with the podcast. I just sat down. I'd been talking and joking about doing it for a long time, and then Sarah from Sip and Knit podcast, Sarah Corrine Knits, and Kat from Heather and Hops, and a couple of other people were like, you should totally do it, just do it. Again, what's the worst that can happen?
So where can they buy it? If people are into, I mean, obviously,
talking
about a whole load of other things, and I will have gone and edited and put up on the screen. But let's just verbally tell people where can you actually get the pattern for your winged socks?
So the little winged socks are available on Ravelry. They're on my designer page, which is Meridittlemakes, and Meridittlemakes everywhere, same thing in Instagram and Ravelry. But if you don't use Ravelry, and I appreciate that quite a lot of people don't at the moment, you can also buy them through my website, which is meridittlemakes.com. So all my patterns will always be available in both places, because I know that not everyone loves Ravelry, and that's fine. So they're currently, depending on when this episode goes up, they are £2 off until the 15th of February, as a bit of a kind of my first pattern launch. Oh well,
in that case, this video will be up before the 15th, because I'm planning to get this video edited and up ASAP. So it will be up before the 15th, so go and get your socks.
Obviously never any pressure, but it's so cool. I don't think I've ever done anything as humbling as this whole process, like putting the call for testers out. I mean, bear in mind, I'm not a big like knitfluencer. I have just reached 300 followers on Instagram. Like, we're talking, I'm very small. Thank you. But I'm really small fry, and that's fine. I'm not doing this to gain popularity or any of that stuff, and it's just a creative exercise for me to see if I can do it and to see if it's beneficial to anyone else. But when I put the call for testers out, I was expecting to get like maybe 5 or 6 people, and I was expecting to have to wait a week to even get that many, and I thought they'd all just be my friends. And then I had like 35 people in the first 12 hours, and I had to close it. I was like, I'm really sorry. I had to get in touch with a bunch of people and say, I'm so sorry, but I decided I know not everybody does this, but I decided to go first come, first served. And that was partly because I wanted it to be a beginner friendly pattern. So I didn't ask anyone a ton of questions. You know, I think I said in the form, what level of knitter would you consider yourself to be? But I didn't, you know, some testing calls can be really extensive, and they, you know, you have to have an active Instagram page, and you have to be willing to talk about it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm not really that fussed about, you know, the extra publicity that I would get from people talking. I mean, that's lovely. And the people who did it, I'm supremely grateful. But I also know that knitting for a lot of people is a very private thing. And that a lot of people who have Instagram for their knitting is mostly for them to consume other people's knitting, not necessarily to put their own stuff into the world. And that's fine. And I don't think it's fair to exclude someone from having a go at testing a pattern because of that. You know, like, you don't have to have an active Instagram in order to be allowed to test something. I think it's kind of a weird condition, but I understand why people do, because of course it's marketing for you, and it's going to help build the hype around the pattern and make sure it's successful. And if that is a source of income for you, hugely important. So I totally understand why people do that. But for me, it wasn't like that. I'm not interested in making loads of money off this pattern or anything like that. I just
I'm most grateful that you are like that, because it was my first test knit. I don't have a huge following on Instagram. I have more subscribers on YouTube, but I don't have a big, and I don't think I'll ever have a big following on Instagram. And the reason why is because, well, all the changes that have happened, and I am so sporadic, and I know I'm sporadic with my my posting, because, you know, I don't always have the time to actually set up things to make it look pretty, to take the nice photographs.
And Instagram really punishes you for that. You know, if you're not consistent, then the algorithm goes, nah, not so interesting. And even if you are consistent, I mean, there are a few big creators, both knitters and otherwise, I followed for years. And one of them, I thought she'd dropped off the face of the earth. I was like, oh, I wonder if she's still making things. And I was thinking about her one day because I saw something that reminded me, and I went to look at her profile, and she's been super active, and I've just not been seeing any of her stuff. So I, you know, made the effort to go and turn notifications on and things. But it is a shame, because the algorithms are really, apparently there is in theory going to be an option coming out on Instagram where you can go back to the chronological feed, so you see everything that's been posted chronologically, which I would be really happy about, to be honest. But yeah, social media, I have a very love-hate relationship with social media. Like, it's a big part of my job. Marketing and branding is kind of the world that I live in, professional, for my day job. But I think it's, on a personal level, I'm not someone who kind of lives my life through social media. When we got married in September, it was really interesting, because a lot of people were like, when are all the photos going to be on Facebook? I was like, they're not. I'm not putting all the photos on the internet. Like, that's not happening. And people really struggled with it. It was like, well, it's a given that we came to the wedding, and we should get access to every photo of us that might be there from that day, and we should be able to share. And I was like, no. We invited you to a relatively small, I mean, I think we had like 65 people in the end, and we had signs up saying, you know, unplug, be here with us, because that's what we wanted, especially because of pandemic times and stuff. We hadn't seen people. Of course, hadn't seen people for such a long time. And amazingly, it was not the original plan, but I met Kat from Heather and Hops online, and we had kind of become friends because I'd been following her, and then I joined the Discord, and I'd seen her on video chats a few times, and by that point we'd played some D&D. But by the time the wedding came around, I'd never actually met her in person. So I remember walking down the aisle, and she was like bawling really, really sweetly. Her and Alex were standing there, and I was like, hi, no, I'm getting married, like wanting to go and say hi to her. Like, no, I need to walk. But it was the same. I hadn't seen anyone. We hadn't seen anybody in such a long time, so it was really important to just kind of be there and be present. So for me, I'm not, most of the time, you know, I'm not that person who like takes pictures of my food and puts like, here's what I had for breakfast, world. And that's, you know, people who do, I don't have any issues with it. I'm just not that person. So it's kind of a tricky thing, knowing that you sort of need to rely on social media to have any level of success.
I know I kind of struggle a little bit with the concept, because it is that whole, all the different videos that are telling you how to, grow on Instagram, how to grow on YouTube, and and there, you have to jump through hoops, and I'm like, I'm 50 blooming 2 years old. I'm not jumping through hoops. I'm doing this for a variety of different reasons. Some of them for me, some of them for other people. You mentioned, doing what you do for the, to inspire people and things. And some of that's, the reason why I'm doing this as well. And sometimes it's just simply because actually it's nice to have people I can chat with. Today, for example, if it hadn't been for the internet, I wouldn't be having this amazing conversation with you.
Yeah.
The age difference between us, I think from our conversation, it isn't really that apparent, other than the visually it's apparent, but from the actual conversation itself. And I just think that's just such a fantastic thing. And I like to use the internet as something to enhance, not to drain my life. I don't want to be spending hours on Instagram liking everybody's photo so that they then remember I'm on Instagram to then come over
like
to
doom scrolling through everything.
When I like people's photographs, it's because I'm there and liking their photographs. I'm not liking to get things back. I went into my work. I was working on Christmas Day, and I went to work with presents for. I looked at the off duty to see who was all working, including the duty doctors that were on. And I took a small gift that I handmade to them. Some of them were a little bit more individuals than others, because my colleagues I knew a little bit better, but the doctor I had never met. It was a newer doctor. I hadn't met them, so it was a bit more of a generic gift, but it was handmade. And one of the people that I was on with was a bit sort of, but we'd agreed not to not to do presents on Christmas Day. One, I wasn't party to that conversation, and two, because I wasn't actually technically on shift with them per se, so I wasn't part of that conversation. And two, I was like, but I don't give gifts in order to
get them back.
receive them. It's I would imagine there's a lot of people that do that, and if they don't get a gift, they're insulted because they think that you don't care, or if it's not an expensive enough gift, they don't think that you care enough about them, and all the kind of usual palaver that comes with human society, unfortunately. But it's what I did because I enjoy it, and I got a kick, and my mood got lifted because they like the fact that they had this gift to open.
Gift giving. So I'm someone who, if you kind of subscribe to the whole love languages thing, one of the ways that I express love towards people is gift giving. I really enjoy it. I spend a lot of time and energy putting thought into cards and gifts. I'm a person who never buys cards. I always make them. I think partly being a calligrapher, it's an easy thing for me to do, but it's still time consuming, but I have the skills to do it, so I always do. Always have actually, ever since I was tiny. I've always made cards, and not for any reason other than I know I can make it personal to that person if I make it. I know that I can make it more meaningful if I make it. But I would never expect people to do that for me. And actually, I'm a person who gets quite deeply uncomfortable when people give me presents outside of kind of my immediate family and people who know me well. If someone just appears and gives me a present, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do with this. And I find it really strange and uncomfortable. So for me, it's never about getting a gift back. It's always because it's a way that seeing somebody else's face light up from something that I've made them brings me so much joy. So it's, in a way, it's a little bit selfish. I love that. I love seeing people get really excited about what I've made them. But also I just really like making things that are personal and thoughtful to that person. And I think probably part of that is the slightly anti-capitalistic part of me. The older I get, the more I know about the way that fast consumerism works and the less okay I am with engaging with it. And of course I do engage with it a bit, we all do. From now on, every now and then I have to buy things on Amazon and all that stuff that I would really prefer not to engage with if I can possibly help it. But at the same time, like I said, I think knitters are kind of hyper aware of the effort and time that actually goes into creating things in general, because of the fact that, you know, we see how long it takes to hand knit. You know, there was an amazing post, and I cannot remember who it was from now, about the fact that crochet cannot be machine made. So if you buy something that's crocheted, a real person sat, like, knitting can be to an extent machine created, and then it might be sewn up by a person, etc. But crochet literally can't be. So if you buy something that's crocheted, a person made that. A person, somebody somewhere in the world made that. And I think that's so important to remember, that there are always people involved. There are always real human beings on the other end of that purchase decision. It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy things at all, but it's just being conscious where you can. And again, within your life circumstances, within your budget, within all that stuff, because we would all love to buy sustainably all the time, but our salaries don't allow for it. What we actually get given as for the work that we do, or the benefits we receive, you know, it's different for everybody. And you know, it can be kind of hard sometimes to get into that sustainability conversation without bearing that in mind. And I think that is really important. And in the world of knitting especially, I love natural fibers, I love unprocessed fibers, I love indie dyed yarn, although I am actually moving kind of slightly not away from indie dyeing at all, because there are some dyers that I really, really love to buy from when I can. But I think just aesthetically, I prefer like solids and semi-solids and tonals as a kind of fabric to work with, especially for garments. So the you know, I'm starting to move more into small businesses rather than indies, so that there is that slightly more scale of, and then the type of yarn they make. So things like Holsgarn, for example, so that still the processing awareness is there from a like, what are we doing to the yarn, what chemicals are we adding, etc. But they're a bit more consistent. And I think again, things to think about with indie dyed yarn is it's really, really beautiful, but it's also often, depending on what you're getting, not massively repeatable, or you know, for people who do want to make the thing exactly the way that you made it, and some people really do, they, you know, like you said with your mum, wants to follow the pattern exactly the way that it was written. And I'm always quite conscious of that with indie dyeing, because it's quite difficult to have that consistency. And I think that's what's amazing about indie yarn, but from a design standpoint, it does make it a little bit trickier. It's all just like knowing. It's just knowing about the things and then making the best decision for you and your circumstances. I don't think there's any, like I said right at the beginning, I don't think shame has any place anywhere. I don't think it's helpful to shame people about anything. I don't think it if Game of Thrones taught us nothing, it was that shaming people does not work. That's my main line about it. And I think that's really important. I think it's important to remember that everyone's circumstances are different. And even if people would really love to always buy from small businesses and indies, and everything was sustainable and everything was eco-friendly, and what does eco-friendly even mean? Like, it gets so complicated and nuanced, and nothing is all good or all bad. Nothing is all black or all white. Like, that's just the way that everything is. So the more informed we can be, and once you do move into the world of design, there is a responsibility there to be kind of conscious of that when you're making things. I think that's really important.
I think it is too. And I also I'm very kind of conscious of the fact that obviously we have been chatting for quite some time now, and I think that's probably a very good place to kind of sort of wind things down. Not that I wouldn't love to just chat more. I
know this is going to be the longest episode. I'm so sorry.
been absolutely fascinating, the way our conversation has kind of dipped in and out of all sorts of different things and how things have connected. And obviously we kind of started this whole kind of conversation because I wanted to chat to you and help promote your little wings socks, because I just had such, as I said before, had such fun knitting them, and it was such a great experience. And I'm hoping that anybody who's been watching this will maybe perchance be inspired to go and follow you on Instagram and watch out for your next Test Knitters call, so that you can get in on the action, because it really was. It was kind of, it was like a leveled up knit along, really, essentially, wasn't it? Everybody was knitting the same thing, so there was all that camaraderie and let's face it, there are some people in this world that absolutely love to find the mistakes, don't they? So
yeah,
let's hone in on that and make the most of that. And although to be fair, there wasn't very many mistakes, really. You did really well.
I don't know. I mean, at the beginning, I realized I'd written there were a couple of sections where I'd written just entirely the wrong numbers, just completely wrong, just totally, completely wrong. But no, it was really fascinating actually hearing about your experience as a test knitter, because obviously I was running the group and trying to keep everybody happy and motivated. And a few people did message me and say, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be able to finish, and all these things. And it was super humbling and really lovely. And I think I completely agree. It was just like kind of a slightly more intense cal, where everyone was doing the same thing together. Everyone was cheering each other on and going, oh no, you can do it. And if people were getting stuck, helping out, because we had people on 3 different continents. So it was, from a time zone standpoint, it was a little bit tricky, because sometimes people would ask a question when I was asleep and I'd wake up and go, oh no, but then someone had already responded to it and helped to rectify it. And that was so lovely, because it felt like the pressure wasn't just on me to go, oh, okay, this is how you do this thing. And it was so much fun. And thank you so much for bringing me on and helping to promote, because it's really lovely. And I think this is the side of the knitting community that I love so much, getting to meet people and people from totally different walks of life. And like we said, there's an age gap, or maybe in real life we otherwise wouldn't have even come across each other. And I think that's so amazing that we get to meet all these incredible people who we otherwise wouldn't have come into contact with at all, and get to learn about them and have these amazing conversations. And I apologize for it being all over the place. That's just my brain.
No, I don't think it was all over the place. I think it's naturally kind of dipped in and out. I think it's flowed really, really very well. From obviously as a professional, I've kind of run groups and things and kind of guided people in and out of kind of specific types of conversations. And I think it's actually really, it's held my attention, and I'm hoping that seen as it's held my attention, it's going to have held a lot of people's attention. So if anybody's still here now, you guys are absolutely awesome.
Thank you so much for sticking with us for however long this has been. But we could keep chatting, couldn't we, all day if we're not careful? So we should probably stop.
No worries. So thank you everybody for watching and listening. I will of course leave any links that we feel that might be useful to you in the description, and don't forget, look after your mental well-being, because nobody else can. Thank you very much for joining me, Meri. Take care of yourself. Bye bye everybody.